Hi, this is John Harcher, and welcome to episode 8 of Valleys of Numenor. The Rings of Power has reached its season finale after only 8 episodes. Should we have gotten 2 more this year? Did they do just enough? Well, let's see. Episode 8. Who Are You? Times 2. We don't get the opening credits right off the bat. Instead, we get the giant hiding from the rain in Erengalen, the Greenwood, a place we'd get to know later under another name. He's staring at the apple Nori gave him, remembering he's not bad. But then he drops the apple and something comes and takes it. He chases after it and finds out it's Nori. But her eyes are weird. She ducks under his cloak, and it's the he, she, it being and the 2 other ones in white. They bow down before him and pledge allegiance to Sauron. So he's here after all, right? Then we get the opening credits. JD and Patrick wrote the script with Jennifer Hutchinson, and Wayne is back directing. So you know there's going to be slow-mo somewhere. Let's get it out of the way right now as Galadriel and Halbrand ride to Eregion. In the city, Celebrimbor and Elrond ponder the fact the king is coming for something to save the elves, and they don't have anything. They've got one piece of mithril. What can they do with it? Just then, the 2 riders arrive, and Halbrand is brought to the healing room. Elrond apologizes for sending Galadriel on the ship to the Grey Havens, but she says she's still not worthy of it. Later, Celebrimbor gets a visitor to his workshop. Somehow, Halbrand is able to get up and move around. The king of the Southland immediately goes to 3 gems on the table, and before the elf can explain what they are, he takes a look at the mithril. Geez, really inquisitive for someone who just had a spear wound sealed up. The elf wants it back, but Halbrand is brainstorming out other ideas of how to make this little bit make a lot. He comes up with the idea of creating an alloy, which is where I get the title of the episode from, Alloyed, to enhance its properties. He tells the elf to consider it a gift. Nice of him to be lording out gifts like that. Back in Numenor, the king is not in good shape. Farazan has the apprentices, including Arion, to come up with a drawing they can use on his tomb. When she's alone with the king, he wakes up and thinks she's Muriel, and he tells her that if they don't return to the old ways, the island will fall. She turns for help, but somehow the king manages to get out of bed and open the secret room to the Palantir. And what is it with the people in this show who can't move, but all of a sudden can get up when the plot calls for it? Arion enters and uncovers it, but does she dare look for herself? King Gilgalad is being told of the new plan. The shape of the object they make would be circular to contain the energy and keep it feeding on itself. The king isn't thrilled, so they really don't have time before they have to leave or die. Celebrimbor mentions he got the idea from Halbrand, but unlocked the secret they need. It's a power not of the flesh, but over it. Say, wasn't that the kind of power Adar said Sauron was looking for? No, that's odd. The king says that they should give up and head back to Lindon. Before they go, Galadriel wants to know exactly where Celebrimbor heard that phrase. He kind of squirrels out of it. Meanwhile, Elrond tries to get the king to give him a little more time. Later on, Celebrimbor and Halbrand start working on something. Galadriel has one of the elves go look for any info about the kings of the Southlands. He leaves, and, well, what do you know? There's the king of the Southlands himself right behind the pillar there. He thanks Galadriel for bringing him there, and he'll never forget what she did for him. Out in the woods, the 3 beings try to tell Sauron he'll be able to get his powers back and remember who he is eventually. The star map he has matches the stars on one of their maps. It's for a constellation called the Hermit's Hat. See, anybody we know wear a hat like that and is kind of a hermit, a wanderer? They tell him the lands of Rune hold the secret to his identity. He starts to crank up his powers, but it's not going very well, so they knock him out with some dust. Wow, some Dark Lord there. Just as he falls, the Harfoots arrive in the underbrush. 2 of the 3 weird beings come chasing after them, Nori finds the giant, but then all of a sudden the other two are right nearby. One of them throws a knife, and it goes right into Sadek. Oops. The giant reveals himself to be the head weirdo. The three beings in white capture Nori, but suddenly the wind whips up and the giant arrives and knocks them out of the way. The head one uses a staff to throw him across the glade and beat him up a bit. Nori does things the old-fashioned way, climbs up a tree and throws rocks at him. He, she, it starts with that old fire trick again and lights the woods up. But by mistake, he dropped his staff. Nori takes it and gives it to the stranger, begging him for help as her family's in trouble. The fire suddenly goes out as the stranger uses the staff. Suddenly, the three beings realize they've made a boo-boo. He's not Sauron after all, but an Istar. He uses the staff to turn them into moths. Huh. Anyone we know used to communicate with moths a little bit for... Huh. The Harfoots are all safe. Well, not all. That knife Sadek took in the gut didn't do any good for his health, so he's not going to be traveling much further. On the boat back to Numenor, Valindel is obviously upset his friends aren't with him. The Queen is down in the hold counting out steps, kind of like how Donald Pleasance did in The Great Escape to trick Richard Attenborough and letting him go in the escape. Muriel tells Elendil he could use some time off to deal with the loss of his son. He knew the choices he made were difficult, but that's what being an elf friend entails. Sometimes the cost of the old ways is a very steep price. The boat pulls into port, but it's not a happy sight. There are black flags on every ship and building, meaning the king has died. Back in the region, they're still trying to find a way to use the mithril. They've been trying the hard way, but Halbrand comes up with an idea to maybe do it softer to get it to work. The elf Galadriel sent to the archives returns with a scroll. Later by a creek, Halbrand finds her and says that they'll be making two of whatever they're doing. Can't be a crown because they don't have enough, so maybe it'll be something smaller. She confronts him over what she's found, that there hasn't been a king in the Southland in 1,000 years. She wants to know his real name. He says he's had many. She goes to stab him with her dagger, but he throws her down and she gets up in the field we saw back in episode 1. And what do you know? She finds her brother there. Well, a nice family reunion. Finrod tells her he's had Sauron all wrong. He was trying to help Middle-earth. She doesn't buy it and walks away, but then finds herself back on the raft with Halbrand. He tries to tell her he felt great remorse after Morgoth's defeat and wanted to make things right with what he had done and heal Middle-earth. He throws her own words back at her and makes her realize that he hasn't lied to her. She just didn't realize who he actually was. He offers her the chance to become his queen. He needs her by him to stay on the light side, or so he says. Then he really digs it in by telling her that the only reason he lives is because of her. She falls into the water and starts to drown. But she's pulled out of the water thanks to Elrond, or so it looks. She's not sure who's who, so she wants him to tell her how they first met, and he does, in agonizing detail, so it's really him. He says Celebrimbor is almost done with what he plans to do. She races to the forge and tells them they're probably not going to see Halbrand anymore, but doesn't tell them why. Oh, and they need to make 3 rings, not 2. I mean, you have 3 gems, why not 3 rings? Kind of like what the head of New Line Cinema told Peter Jackson. I mean, you got 3 books, why not make 3 movies? And she actually has a good point. 1 will corrupt. 2 will divide. As they say on Schoolhouse Rock, 3 is the perfect number. Now, to make these rings, Celebrimbor needs Valinorian gold and silver, or else it won't work. But where can they find some at this late date? Hey, guess what Finrod's dagger is made out of? Nori can now have a coherent conversation with the stranger. He still can't figure out exactly who he is, but if he goes to Rune, that should help. She asks him if he is one of these Istars. He says her people usually refer to them as wizards. The Harfoots are preparing to move on, without Sadek, but Nori will be taking a different path with her parents' blessing. With that, she begins her unexpected journey. But which way? The giant says, always follow your nose. Say, didn't somebody say that to someone else in one of these other pictures? Galadriel melts her brother's dagger down and they pour the liquid metal into the ringmaker. Elrond adds the mithril, and with that, he makes 3 identical metal pieces. These are melted down again into a ring apiece. By the stream, Elrond finds the scroll, but by the time he comes back to the forge, the 3 elven rings are now complete. And in the land of Mordor, Sauron makes his way towards Mount Doom in his own ring making. The season ends with the famous poem of the rings set to music, properly eerie and downbeat. With this episode, it seems Patrick and JD have taken a page from Game of Thrones. Season 8 Game of Thrones. We kind of rushed through some things we should have held off on for quite a bit. So Sauron revealed himself and the Elden Rings have been created. They even managed to work in an Anatar reference, whose name means Gift Lord, even though it's not 100% clear if they'll be able to use the name since it didn't show up until the Silmarillion. The thing is, the way it was done in the stories was that Sauron basically tricked Celebrimbor into making the 7 rings for the dwarves, 9 rings for the men, and started working on the 3 rings for the elves. Once those were created, the Dark Lord went off to Mount Doom and created the 1 ring. But the elf managed to see through his designs and hid the 3 rings. The problem with the way they did it here is they can't have another guy come in and have an idea about creating rings for the dwarves and men. They should have been done already. And if somehow he comes back, they have to make sure Galadriel isn't around. They seem to have written themselves into a bit of a corner here. Not sure how they're going to work through this. If only Celebrimbor had had some help in scoping out Halbrand to Sauron to avoid being tricked. If only he had help from a fairy godmother. Or a fairy godfather. He could have told him this. Someone will come to you and propose a meeting. He'll talk to you about how to harness this power you're looking for. Since you don't have a lot of this to meet religion, he'll come up with this idea about creating some kind of jewelry, necklace, rings, or something like that. Once you create these rings, then you'll be assassinated. Whoever comes to you and proposes to you this idea about the rings, he's the traitor. It would have saved them a lot of trouble. The other big reveal is we finally find out who the big meteor guy is. It establishes how he formed a connection with the Harfoots, which would translate into wait a minute, I see the coach reaching for the red flag, and he throws it. We have a challenge on the field. It's clear once the big guy grabs hold of the staff and the 3 weirdos call him Istar, he's meant to be the most famous Istar of all, Gandalf. There's only one little problem with this. Tolkien clearly states the Istari did not arrive in Middle-earth until about 1,000 years into the Third Age. The only way I can see for them to get around this is if they come up with some story about the Valar sending just one of them there first to find out what's going on. But he cannot still be around by the end of the series. He has to go back where he came from long before Numenor is destroyed. Now, considering how much time they spent on this plot during the season, this isn't just a quick bit of fan service. They definitely intend to have him do something. They just have to make sure he doesn't do too much. So it was a good season finale, but it seems like they rushed a couple of these plot points they needed to hit. Plus, the dwarf and men plot lines were kind of just left where they were last episode, so we'll just have to wait and see where they pick those up. Now, I would have held off on the Sauron reveal until next season and have him work on the rings with Celebrimbor, and over the course of the first couple episodes next year, have him discover he was tricked. Then mid-season, do the big reveal. Right now, we've got the Leland Palmer problem. Like, okay, we find out he killed Laura, and then eventually everybody knows it, and he gets caught. So now what? We got our Dark Lord, who could still actually be someone else, like possibly Anatar, though that's more of a Pharazôn-centric guise. It looks like they may be trying to be too clever by half, but let's see how this plays out next season. Now, what was here was very well done. I have to point out special praise for Bear McCreary's score, and especially the One Ring song at the end. Just the music was extremely well done top to bottom. With the passing of the king, that plot line can begin to move forward quickly with Pharazôn taking center stage. Okay, we know we'll see Isildur again, so there's a bit of false drama there, like, oh my god, he's buried. No, come on, we know. We also know from press reports that we'll be getting Círdan the Sailor Elf next season. He actually gets one of the rings and eventually hands it off to Gandalf, at least in the stories. There's also the Anarion and Celeborn questions, characters who appear to be dead in the show but are alive in the original stories at this point. But overall, this series has done a good job of telling the story it wants to tell, and it's not Jeffrey's folly. It's not an out and out debacle. Now, will it end up paying for itself in the end? That we'll have to see. Next time, we'll do a season recap, see what they've covered and what they haven't. We'll also look at how the show was marketed and how that may have hindered the show early on. And finally, how it measures up in the Heart of Dixie scale. The what scale? You'll see next time. I think I may try to do a video podcast next time, use some visual aids, kind of make it a little more interesting that way. Please hit the subscribe button wherever you're hearing us. I'm John Hartram. Thanks for listening.